the rate of the economic, institutional, and cultural collapse in the United States continues to increase. So much so that everyone can sense that there is something fundamentally wrong in our country, and that the newspapers and television stations are incapable of giving us anything but fairy tales. And yet, we seem to be powerless to stop the transformation of our country into a moral desert, into a slave state servicing a handful of the elite. But why? If this many people are aware of the profound contradictions in our country, of the loathing beneath the surface, why do we remain so paralyzed? Why are we convinced that no action can be taken? Why are so many talented young people having so much trouble organizing, making sure that every action that they take is focused on transforming our society, working together with their neighbors to create a better world? There are several reasons for this terrible paralysis. We have been soaked in a saccharine consumer culture created by advertising firms for the last 70 years. This sickly bath has stripped us of our powers as citizens, rendering us as consumers of things, of images, of feelings. We watch on TV authority figures talk about everything except what is critical for our country. It has all become a macabre carnival. Suffice it to say that our country has suffered a grievous wound some 20 years ago that has turned to gangrene. Rather than bravely cutting off that infected finger and halting the rot, we covered it up with a Band-Aid and let the poison course through our veins, unseen and unheard, until the infection reached every single corner of the body politic. That is where we are now. For those of you who still have a job, you can go to Starbucks and have a pleasant conversation with a friend about family life, about the vacation you took, or the Italian meal you had last week. Most of us, however, are returning from a long day of trying to do something, anything, working but getting no pay. We barely have enough strength to cook supper for our kids. We feel so hopeless, and so does everyone around us. We hear stories that the lockdown will end soon, but no one really believes it. My most urgent role as candidate is to bring you some hope and to sketch out a road forward which is proactive and not reactive to increasingly unrealistic demands from moneyed interests and from those parts of the government that those interests control. I want to talk to you about 3 trends in America that have contributed to this sad state. One in which we feel we have no freedom, no power, so much so that we end up being tossed and buffeted by invisible forces. We sense the flow of obscure power behind the surface, at the mall, in our living rooms, and in our offices, when we're allowed to go there. The 3 trends that have robbed us of our freedom, stripped us of any confidence in our actions, are called Movementism, Complainism, and Magicianism. These terms are unfamiliar and perhaps a bit jarring. They are supposed to be unfamiliar and jarring because we want to wake people up, to shake them up out of their current slumber so that we can all think again for ourselves, so that we can believe that we can actually change this world. It is far, far more important for me to shock you than it is for me to recount to you platitudes about how everything can just be great if we make a few minor corrections. Nobody believes that to be true anymore. The first problem is movementism. Movementism refers to the organization of large and small movements involving public gatherings, fundraising, and campaigns to promote the signing of petitions and the collection of endorsements of a policy or a perspective. Movementism focuses on exposure, on image making, and demands attention from a depressed and discouraged population via for-profit newspapers and for-profit social media. The leaders of these movements are promoted in the corporate media where they publish books, meet with famous politicians, popular singers, royalty, and other celebrities. The best examples of movementism can be found in the failed opposition to the Iraq War in 2002, the efforts to address the sexual abuse of women through the Me Too movement, and the drive to increase awareness of climate change as seen in the activities of figures like Greta Thunberg. These activities take up an enormous amount of time. They fill up thousands of Facebook postings, and they require huge budgets. The movements give the impression that something is being done, but they deliver measly results, serving often to draw attention away from more committed people who are more capable of effective organizing. Those caught up in movementism are often quite sincere and completely unaware of the ineffectiveness of their actions. The protests against the United States plans for war with Iraq, starting in September 2002, were classic movementism. The anti-war protests were certainly impressive, forming the largest coordinated mass demonstrations in world history, or so we are told. There were also hundreds of government officials and even a few brave politicians who stepped forward to oppose the Bush administration. But none of those inspiring efforts were effective in stopping a pointless war that enriched a handful of the elites. The bombings went forward unimpeded, and the conflict continues to this day. What went wrong? How could it be that so many people protested, and yet still a small number of the rich and powerful were able to make such a dangerous decision with complete impunity? And why has there been so little serious discussion of the reasons why those protests failed so miserably? We have been completely seduced by the idea that getting attention in the media is critical. The core assumption of movementism is that if lots of people know the truth, and that somehow this will impact the decision-making process of the elites, of the wealthy. No one seems to consider the possibility that the super rich have a value system which is fundamentally alien to us. The media suggests, however, that a cause must get sufficient attention and endorsement from celebrities before it can be a legitimate movement. But we forget that celebrityhood itself is the commodity that the media sells. Movementism is a process by which citizens are convinced that their actions are valuable by the media and by social networks run for profit and not run to save the world. Money is generated based on the promotional activities that increase engagement. Success of that movement is not of any interest to those media conglomerates. The activities are widely reported by this corrupt, for-profit media, but they cannot be activities that undermine the profits of those corporations. That means that the movements reported on cannot be economically independent, and they cannot draw attention to how the heroes promoted by the media derive profit from those very same corporations. That is to say, movementism is part of the promotion of a consumer culture and of the cult of the self. The goal in movementism is self-realization and not the formation of organized groups with a deep moral commitment to a cause. Many of us assume that a movement must have lots of money, media recognition, and the backing of famous people before we can support it. That is what we've been taught to believe. But remember, you are not a user of Facebook or Twitter, but rather a product being sold to corporate clients. And what do those corporate clients want who are being serviced by Facebook and Twitter when they purchase you? They want you to think you're doing something very important, but to have no real impact. So what might a real movement look like? Let us consider the anti-slavery movement of the 1850s, which led to a transformation of the economy and actually improved the living conditions for many people. Anti-slavery was a massive movement that engaged people in local organizations where they met in person to debate policy and to promote radical action. It involved actions like the Underground Railroad, in which members of the anti-slavery movement risked their lives repeatedly in dangerous efforts to smuggle African Americans out of slavery and to aid them as they organized a terrible struggle inside the plantations themselves. Few of those sacrifices were even recorded, but the organizations themselves grew only more powerful. The members formed participatory institutions and bonds for life. They were not obsessed with voting in elections or with circulating petitions to sign, because they knew that such harmless activities would do nothing to end the profitable crime of slavery. For them, their strongest card in the game was not support from wealthy philanthropists, or likes on Facebook, but rather their willingness to die for the cause. The leading anti-slavery activist, Frederick Douglass, wrote about why African Americans and their supporters had to struggle, whether they wanted to or not. He noted, "This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those who they oppress. Whether Occupy Wall Street, Ferguson, or the strikes against oppression in private prisons, such struggles are going on right now. No celebrities are present, no kind opening remarks by supporters in the business community. The second problem in American politics is complainism. Complainism is the practice, especially in journalism, but also in our conversations with friends and family, of complaining incessantly about what is wrong about the United States and about how unfair things are, but not offering any deep analysis of the causes or any concrete alternatives to the current situation. Any suggestions as to how the listener can help. Such journalism and political debate discourages citizens. We are presented with catastrophes and convinced we have no option but despair. One cannot help suspecting that the powerful are delighted by this relentless complainism. The political crisis is worsened because the alternative media does not present opportunities to take action either. The alternative media may offer more accurate reports, but the alternative media offers few suggestions as to where you can go in your neighborhood to discuss these issues and to move forward with collective action. You are not taught how to become independent of monopolies like Amazon, Facebook, Viacom, or Microsoft. Complainism journalism focuses on a few bad apples like Donald Trump, George Soros, or Jeff Bezos, often suggesting that if these individuals were more caring, more enlightened, these problems could all be solved. There is no analysis about how the structure of the economy encourages greed and exploitation, or about how the control of finance, of manufacturing, or of trade by the few determines our economic reality. The process by which the waging of war or the promotion of fossil fuels creates profits for those who offer criticism of policy remains a completely taboo subject. Complainism journalism never describes how profits go into the retirement funds or the stock portfolios of the upper middle class intellectuals who are quoted in the media as thoughtful critics. This incestuous relationship between the educated people who are supposed to serve as watchdogs, standing up for the public interest, and corporate profit is precisely why they are incapable of presenting an accurate critique. If we organize into effective groups committed to each other and to achieving our goals, we can start to change the economy and the political system. That approach is never suggested as a response in complainism journalism. Complainism in the media cannot be separated from the radical degradation of intellectual discourse. Analysis in the media, in university, and in think tanks is completely devoid of any serious consideration of history. If we talk about the White House or Congress, there is no discussion whatsoever about the institutional history of those organizations or even a description of their functions today. The CIA or Google are described as if they are the same organizations that they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago, without a single word about their internal structure or about their financial interests. This lack of historical context leaves the reader with only piles of negative information, without an understanding of deeper issues or even a roadmap. We have no idea where to go next. The last problem is magicianism, or the promotion of magicians in politics. The assumption in the discussion in politics is that we need to elect or to follow somebody special, and that one special person will have sufficient power that all our problems will be solved for us. It is assumed that our only role as citizens is to vote for this magician in November and then go back to our lives and leave it up to him or to her. Such magicianism rhetoric was employed to great effect in the presidential campaign of Barack Obama, which pivoted around the slogan, "Change," which was aggressively promoted through advertising firms paid by the Democratic Party. Corporate funding pushed this message that if we just supported Barack Obama, this brilliant and articulate young man, he would transform the United States. In other words, all that was required for real change after the massive criminality of the late Clinton years and the Bush administration was for a Democrat to be elected president. This was a bald lie. Any real solution to the corruption of institutions had to involve citizens after the massive criminality of that period. This was a bald lie. Any real solution to the corruption of institutions had to involve citizens at all levels and to put forth a plan for the required and dangerous but essential house cleaning. But for Barack Obama, it was just too easy. All that we needed to do was to vote for him and to tell others about what a great job he would do. But then, lo and behold, Obama, that agent of change, cool and collected, rushed to bail out corporate banks and lent a ready hand to the gutting of financial regulation in the United States as a reward to his supporters, the financial interest groups who bought him the media coverage in the first place. The Bernie Sanders campaign had some appeal for citizens, but he was similarly sold as the magician who would solve problems for us. His election campaign used the dollars sent in by working people who could barely afford their rent to pay companies to run expensive ads on TV in the primaries. He may have meant well, but Sanders' campaign did not invest a single penny in building long-term organizations on the ground for citizens. Such organizations could have allowed our citizens to become politically self-sufficient and so continue their efforts for reform 24 hours, 7 days a week. If anything, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party cultivate dependency. That is what they do. To ask them to do something differently is like asking a tiger to become a vegan. Professor Theda Skopel's book, Diminished Democracy, From Membership to Management in American Civic Life, describes extremely carefully and accurately how Americans moved away from regular participation in local organizations. Organizations like the YMCA, the Masons, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, or the Lions Club, organizations wherein they practiced democratic administration in their daily lives. Over the past 5 decades, however, a political culture of management has taken the place of participation, causing a catastrophic collapse in democracy and in transparency in our political system. That loss of participation by citizens ushered in the unacceptable and opaque political culture that we wrestle with today. I ask you, have you ever been invited by the Democratic Party or by the Republican Party to attend an event in which they ask for your opinion or allow you to participate in the process by which they determine their policies? We will not defeat the superficiality of political engagement in the United States by writing Facebook posts or by complaining about how corrupt Donald Trump is. Such complaints are a waste of our time. We cannot create a healthy political culture by buying TV commercials for politicians. We must build powerful institutions that are made up of people at the local level and that work together daily with other people. We must engage in transformation. That means turning off the internet, knocking on the doors of our neighbors, and getting back in the habit of talking with friends and family about real issues. No one can do that work for us. The Japanese philosopher Ogyū Sōrai wrote many years ago, "In the game of chess, there are 2 ways to become a master. One way is to learn all the strategies of chess, all the openings and all the end games, and to have a deep understanding of chess, which informs every single move. That sort of mastery is most familiar to us. But there is another way to become a master of chess, and that is to make up the very rules of chess itself. The moments when it is possible to make up the rules, to create a new political culture, are few and far apart. But the current political crisis in the United States is so profound and so complete. The horrific dangers it poses are so clear that it offers us a rare opportunity for complete transformation. I would even go so far as to say that we have no choice but to throw ourselves into the battle. Thank you for your valuable attention.